Alcohol sales have seen a historic decline in Canada despite bringing in more money. Here's a live look at an LCBO tonight. A recent report from Statistics Canada finds 1.2% less alcohol by volume was sold between April 1st of 2021 and March 31st of 2022. That's equivalent to about 3.1 billion liters. However, $26.1 billion of alcohol was sold during the same period, a 2.4% increase, which StatsCan says was driven by inflation. Experts say the decrease in volume doesn't necessarily mean people are drinking less, and it's most likely due to the pandemic's impact on restaurants and bars. So for more on this, I'm joined now by Dan Malleck, professor in the Department of Health Sciences at Brock University and director of the Centre for Canadian Studies. Hi, Dan. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Hi, my pleasure to be here.
So on a surface level, this seems like good news, but it appears these statistics don't show a decrease in how much alcohol people are actually consuming. After all the new studies that have come out on how alcohol really does affect our health, are you surprised by this?
Yeah, I don't think that this has anything to do with those studies. I mean, this data comes from back in, I think it ends in March 2022. But I'm not really surprised at these numbers. I mean, a lot of this has to do with, I think, generational change. We've seen the so-called Gen Z not drinking as much, and the older generations that may have drunk more are aging out of the demographic, if you understand what I'm saying. But also, yeah, the pandemic had a big hit on certain types of drinking behavior and certain types of drinks people were consuming.
Yeah, and by the studies, I mean, there are some very recent ones, but we have heard studies in the past couple of years even on how alcohol can affect your health. But I'll get back to that in the recent study. But how might the pandemic might have impacted alcohol sales in terms of going out to eat or events like weddings or whatnot?
Yeah, exactly. Like when we look at, especially the big thing people are talking about is this significant decline in wine. I guess it's a drop that we haven't seen since the 1940s, a sort of percentage drop in wine, not the full amount being sold, but the amount it went down. And that I think is really linked to things that you like what you just talked about. The place of wine in our lives is often we have it at dinner parties, take it we take it to dinner parties, or at weddings and other events, or when we're going out. And during the pandemic, that stuff wasn't happening as much. So I'm not surprised at all at the decline in wine. I don't think it is an overall trend. In fact, I think that the numbers for wine were fairly flat before 2021, 22, as far as per capita consumption, which means it was going up because the population is going up. Yeah.
Do you think alcohol preferences have an impact on this report? Like beer and wine was down, but wine coolers and ciders were up. Like, what's your take on these preferences?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. And unfortunately, the data that's provided by StatsCan doesn't split cider from other types of drink, like coolers and those prefabricated cocktails, right? Like a can of rum and coke or a mojito. And those are very different types of drinks, I think, for people. Like it might be that during the pandemic there was people were looking for a cocktail and they couldn't get to the bar, so they may have picked those up. But also, that's also part of an industry move into more of those, grab and go kind of drinks, right? Where instead of going and mixing your own drink, you can just have a can of something. Whereas cider, it seems to me to be reflective, really, of a growth in craft cider. We've seen an explosion in craft cider manufacturing, and which I think may appeal to people who already want some craft, local kind of beverages, but aren't really into beer.
Interesting. I mean, that's true. I mean, but if you pair this with other recent data on alcohol sales, would you say there's a trend in people drinking less, or is this just an anomaly?
It is tough to say whether people are actually drinking less. I think when we look, for example, at the downward movement of beer, for example, which has been going for decades, declining, that does suggest that people may not be drinking the volumes that people used to be drinking. And we do get a lot of information from one side about the harms of alcohol consumption. I think that it's a little distorted the way it's presented, but people are willing to take that in, and that may be adjusting their drinking behavior. And there's also a growing non-alcoholic beer and non-alcoholic spirits market, which is still small, but it is appealing to that health conscious or that non-alcohol sort of impetus for people.
Okay,
Yeah.
very interesting to get your insight, Dan. I appreciate you coming on tonight. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That's Dan Malleck, health sciences professor at Brock University.